What is up, everybody? Mr. Curtis here. Welcome to 8.9. We're doing the end of the Cold War. We started this unit on the Cold War. We did a couple Cold War stuff, proxy wars. We decolonized the world. And now we're going to get into the end of the Cold War, how all that happened, which was really the late 70s through the early 90s. But it's part of this time period of 1900 to 2001. So that's why the date is right there. Let's rock and roll here. So here's the deal. Late 70s, early 80s, the Soviet Union, which had existed since 1918, runs into some serious issues in the early 80s. There's really three of them. Number one, the arms/space race created economic problems in the Soviet Union. In the 80s, there was really, for the most part, depending upon who you were, but for the most part, there was an economic boom in the United States. Meanwhile, while the United States' economy is soaring, which means more tax revenue, which means more ability to pump money into the military, the Soviet Union's economy is on the downward side of things. Sure. So that's issue number one. And as the U.S. is still pumping money into their military and space program, the Soviet Union finds themselves putting in more percentage of their overall revenue into that program, which means less money for everything else, which is never a good thing. Number two, they got involved in the war in Afghanistan. I mentioned this in the proxy wars, but that's really going to cause a problem for the Soviet Union because they are pumping money into a war that they realize is impossible to win, but they've wasted a lot of money in an attempt to win this proxy war, which they are going to lose. Lastly, is there's a shortage of food and consumer goods, meaning that you need a new pair of shoes, you might have to wait a couple months in the Soviet Union. Things that in the United States today we could never even really comprehend for a lot of people, that we have so much choice and ability to choose, that there's just not enough shoes for people to buy. And not even just styles, just straight up shoes. So your shoe has a hole in it, you might just not be able to get one for a little while, or the delivery might be 2 weeks behind, so you just have to wait. There's a new leader in the early to mid 1980s by the name of Mikhail Gorbachev. And this is him right here. He's kind of a notorious character of him because he has a birthmark on his head. But he's a new leader. He's progressive, meaning that he is promoting change and he's trying to implement changes. And there's two programs that he implements in the mid 80s to attempt to solve these problems that have existed in the Soviet Union for the past couple of years. So he's going to kind of change the basic idea of a communist country and start to allow more Western or capitalist ideas, which is really against the beliefs of communism and what people have been taught in the Soviet Union for the past 70 years. So he's going to allow for more capitalism. So he's going to allow people to own their own businesses and to profit off of their businesses. And the idea is maybe we can jumpstart this Soviet economy. That's called perestroika. The other idea that he has is called glasnost. He's going to allow more political freedoms. It's the time of the 80s, so there's increased air travel, you can fax people, there's televisions, you can broadcast stuff. So this idea of keeping a society closed is becoming more and more difficult with technological advances. So they are going to allow for more political freedoms. It had been decades in the Soviet Union without basic freedom of speech in the press, and now suddenly you're going to allow it. And I was taught, one example I like to give is, it's kind of like you're in a class in your high school where the teacher is super strict and everyone is scared of everything all the time. And then when you, that's like what's been like in the Soviet Union. And then you leave that class when the bell rings and you're just like, oh my God, thank God. And you're just like, blah, 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 blah. And that's what it's like under glasnost, where people finally have this freedom of speech and they want to express their anger and outrage. And what ends up happening is, because of Gorbachev's changes that are not only in the Soviet Union, but in the satellite countries as well, people are going to start protesting. They're like, finally, we can say something without knowing that we're going to get arrested. And they start protesting around Eastern Europe. Eventually, over the course of the mid to late 80s, all of these satellite countries, remember we got East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, are going to declare and get their independence. So you can see this sweeps like a wave really over the course of 2 years. It's really fast and confusing for people who live through this, where you get Poland in 89, Slovakia, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Romania, all these are in 89 and 90. And then you have these countries of Yugoslavia, which after communism falls there, all these little groups, remember the Balkans and this tension, get their independence of Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia, Herzegovina, this area. And then eventually when the Soviet Union collapses, Russia becomes its own country. And then little countries emerge here that existed right after World War I, like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Belarus, the Ukraine down here. So we have all these new countries popped up. In November of 1989, the Berlin Wall comes down over the course of like a sporadic night, which was the symbol of the Cold War. When that comes down, it's like, boom, everything's done. So over the course of 2 years, we go from a Cold War under Gorbachev and like more openness to the Soviet Union is gone and the Cold War is over. Just like that. So by 1991, the Cold War is over. When Russia ends communism, there's like a lot of stuff that's just up for grabs. You had this command communist economy for so long, even with a little bit of capitalism that Gorbachev had, where you had like the oil industry was owned by the government. Now you got to figure out, what do we do with this industry that was owned by the government? And a small group of wealthy people who are generally called oligarchs start buying up these industries and get like crazy wealthy. And really in Russia today, there are not much, I mean, to a certain degree similar to the United States, but like there's a small group of people who own a lot of stuff. And there's a small group of people in Russia who are really kind of crazy wealthy compared to the rest of the country as a result of buying up industries after the Cold War. The government is democratic today. There is not the same freedoms that most other countries around the world enjoy today. There is a state-run media or state-run television station that promotes the beliefs of the government and always agrees with the government. Also, the economy is capitalist, but it does have some government involvement. But for the most part, it's capitalist. This is Vladimir Putin. He has been in power in Russia since 2000. He served 2 6-year terms, and then he was termed out. So then he had been the president, and then he shifted power, the prime minister. Basically, he's been in charge for the past 20 plus years. He was a colonel under the KGB, which was kind of like the spy organization in the Soviet system. So he's been in power. Even though the Cold War is over, since Putin has been in power, the U.S. and Russia have not gotten along very well, and there was accusations which have pretty much been founded by all major U.S. intelligence organizations that in the 2016 election, Russia attempted to influence the election against Hillary Clinton. That's pretty much all of the different intelligence agencies in the U.S. have agreed with that. So this, even though the Cold War is over, there is still tension between the United States and Russia. I like this picture. It's just kind of funny. That's Putin riding a horse with his shirt off because, I don't know, why not? So that's what I got. That's the end of the Cold War. That's Russia. I'm out.